All right, let's call to order the September 17th meeting of the Rotary Club of Des Moines. I'm President Doug Saltzgaver. We're glad to have all of you with us here at the Wakanda Club for how many days in a row now? 8. That's right, we got a few keeping track. Welcome to all of you. Thanks to Invictus Media for filming our meeting as they have been doing. Aren't these guys doing a great job? Making me look good? Yes, let's give them a round of applause. And please excuse any noise you may hear out there in cyberspace. Wakanda's having some work done on the roof, and also thanks for everyone here navigating the new entrance into our space here because of the construction. And welcome to all of those out there in cyberspace watching today. I'm not wearing my mask while here at the podium, so you can hear me more clearly. I'm safely distanced from you, and I seldom drool, so I think we're all good. We will be, of course, sanitizing the microphone between speakers. We do ask that you keep your mask on when not eating or drinking or speaking from the podium here, please. I will now ask 9 times past President Skeet Wooten to share a moment of inspiration, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance and the 4-way test.
Really? Standing ovation? I'm impressed. Sorry. A standing ovation. Thank you, oh wise and powerful Supreme Leader. Okay, I have the challenge today of trying to do something that will inspire you, built around a program to be given by 2 guys who are in the funeral business. Talk about misreading the calendar. I suppose the old, well, gee, Mrs. Lincoln, I guess, other than that, how was the play, probably won't suffice. Or asking how is business and have them say, well, it's really quiet. That probably won't cut it either. So rather than focusing on what they do, I decided to focus on and celebrate and recognize what I think is the most important thing that they do, and that's celebrating lives. So here are a few thoughts on that subject. Lawrence Fish said, "Find life experiences and swallow them whole. Travel, meet new people. Go down some dead ends and explore some dark alleys. Try everything. Exhaust yourself in the glorious pursuit of life." Mark Twain, who always had something to add, said, 20 years from now, you will be more disappointed by the things you didn't do than by the ones that you did. Throw off the bow lines, sail away from the safe harbor. Catch the trade winds in your sails. Explore, dream, and discover. Benjamin Franklin said, life's tragedy is we get too old too soon and wise too late. Henry Miller, great playwright, wrote that the goal of life is to live. And to live means to be aware, joyously, drunkenly, serenely, divinely aware. Charlie Munger said that all I want to know is where I'm going to die, so I never go there. And I'm going to close with a wonderful sign that was above the door at the Mayflower Coffee Shop in Dallas, Texas, where I used to live. As you ramble through life, whatever be your goal, keep your eye upon the donut and not upon the hole. Would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Just so you know, the Constitution was signed on this day. 4-way test. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it be goodwill and better friendship? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? Thank you. Wave at your fellow Rotarian.
Skeet took my line there. I was supposed to say wave at everybody. Thank you, Skeet. Happy birthday to member Jim Tomatich, a fellow engineer, and honorary member Senator Chuck Grassley today. We hope they're having a great day, and also that they are partying like how? Like it's 1999. Need more birthdays so everyone remembers that. And now, 3 times past president Jamie Boersma will introduce our keynote speaker today. Remember, for any questions for our speaker, there is a microphone stand. Katie will sanitize the mic between questions with a rag that fell off the roof. Please do not shout out your questions from your seat. Also note, we have moved the microphone over here, away from the hallway. That way we can get a wide-angle shot so we can see who is asking the question. And no, just because it's wide-angled, it's not going to make it look like you've gained 40 pounds. So this way, everyone watching on the YouTube video will be able to see and hear you. So with that, Jamie, take it away.
Well, thank you, President Doug. That is a talent that I did not have to do 3 years ago as president, is learn how to wipe everything off. So you've done a nice job. Thank you for doing that. Anyway, it is my pleasure today to introduce our program. And I am introducing Mark Iles and Bob Christensen, who are members of our club today. So I first am going to introduce them, and then I'll introduce the program. So here we go. Bob is an advanced planning counselor for Hamilton's Funeral Home in Des Moines. Bob was born and raised in Humboldt, Iowa. He founded Humboldt's first radio station and cable television system in 1970 and was a Rotarian there, also in Humboldt. Bob has been active in our state, serving the Branstad administration and Governor Ray's campaigns. Mark Iles, he joined his father, Chuck, at Iles Funeral Homes 32 years ago. You don't look that old, Mark. Good job. Yeah. Chuck founded Iles Funeral Homes in 1960, and now Mark serves as the president of the company, which consists of 5 locations in and around Des Moines. He also follows his father's legacy with us as a long-term member of this club. Today's program is very Rotarian, because when we consider competitors in the same industry taking the podium together to give us an update on their industry, that's very Rotarian. So we are appreciating that they will get up here today and help us through, and they do cooperate. So hopefully we get some stories around that as we go. I suspect, this is really consistent with their overall business practice, which is, as they say, to cooperate and serve our community. So the title of the program is Funeral Service in 2020. Their industry looks very different than it did in 2019, and like many of you, I'm sure they've had to pivot to respond to the changes brought on by COVID-19. So now I want to welcome Bob and Mark today. Mark's going to start us off, so he'll come up to the podium first. But if we could just give them a big thank you for what they do each day, and also just for the fact that they have been longtime Rotarians, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Doug and Jamie. We have been very fortunate to have a colleague in funeral service like Hamilton's for all these years. We have always had a great working relationship with them. And as for Bob, he and I go back 3 decades, and we've had a great friendship for a long, long time, and we've maintained a good friendship through that period. And so I'm really proud to be sharing the podium today with Bob Christensen. You know, 2020. What can you say? I mean, look at this room. Look at the lives that we live every day, and look at how things have changed. And really, there's no funeral service has been really no exception to that. I am going to share with you a little bit about how our profession has dealt with the pandemic, not only from our funeral home's point of view and what we had to do to adjust to it, but probably even more importantly from the families that we served's point of view and how they had to adjust to it. Bob is then going to speak about the same thing as it relates to families who want to do advanced planning with either of our funeral homes and talk about those issues as it relates to those families. So I'm going to start off with a slide. It's a slide that's put out by the CDC. I thought it was a pretty interesting slide, and I thought you might enjoy seeing it. The purplish, bluish, or whatever shaded area, that's weekly. Those are weekly bars, and those go all the way back to the beginning of 2017, and they complete around the end of July of this year. And what those weekly bars show is the total number of deaths that occurred in the United States during that week. There's a yellow line that kind of goes over the top of those bars, and that yellow line represents what the CDC estimates the maximum number of deaths to occur in that week. And as you can see, the vast majority of the time, the blue, purple shaded area never reaches that yellow line. About the only time it exceeded that yellow line was when we had a particularly difficult flu season in the winter of 2018. It got above that yellow line for a few weeks. But as you can see, in the winter of 19 and in the winter of 20, where we had mild flu seasons, it did not reach that line. However, starting in about April of this year, you can see where that shaded area exceeded the line quite dramatically and has continued to exceed that line really through the end of the graph, which I believe was somewhere around the last week in July. In April of this year, let me step back just a moment. When you see that increase in the death rate, it wasn't evenly distributed throughout the United States, not at all. You probably remember the New York City area and the issues that they had. I have colleagues that serve that market, and they were literally beside themselves working 24/7, trying to keep up with the number of deaths that were occurring in that part of the country at that point in time. Here in Iowa, we've been pretty fortunate. We've not really seen a dramatic increase in our death rate here in Iowa. So it's been very disproportionate where these deaths have occurred throughout the country. In Iowa, however, due to COVID-19, you might recall that Governor Reynolds put in place in April of this year a limitation of 10 people who could gather at any given point in time. And as you might expect, when it comes to celebrating a person's life, that put a tremendous restriction on doing that. And it also caused us in our profession to have to really adapt to trying to figure out different ways to help families during that period of time. We served a family right after the pandemic started who the daughter, her mother died, and she was willing to be interviewed for the purpose of sharing with anyone who would watch this video what she experienced or what they experienced as a family. So I want to show about a 4 or 5 minute video that we produced that I think will give you a bit of an idea of not only what it was like from the family's perspective, but also what we as a profession had to do to try to adapt and change to be able to serve families during a time like that. So if we can go ahead and start that video, please.
It was certainly hard during the time, but I have to say it's been even harder since. Now I realize I used to think wakes were grueling, especially with a large family. You stand there for hours and you greet people, and it's so wonderful that, people come and to show their love and respect. So it can be grueling. But I've changed my mind about that. For the last 5 months, I see people for the first time since Mom has died. And there's, you want to hug, you can't, and then, you talk about it. Not that, I love to talk about her. I love to. So it's the longest wake ever. The whole COVID thing really flared up just about a week before Mom died. She died of a major heart attack. I told everybody, no hugging, don't hug her, don't get too close. I lived with Mom, and I hadn't kissed her goodnight, for about 10 days before she died.
They're already traumatized when they come to us because of that separation. And our goal is to give them some of that contact back.
But with that contact comes personal safety risks.
Mom's immediate family, including her children and their spouses, and her grandchildren and their spouses, and her great-grandchildren, plus she has a sister, is 83 people. When we found out that we could only have 8 at the funeral, I had a hard time wrapping my head around that. We would be the 8 that could be in the church. And then the spouses and the grandchildren and some of the great-grandchildren were in the parking lot in their cars and could watch the live stream.
The pandemic is forcing drive-through visitations. Funeral services are mostly being held online.
Mom had several grandsons that were not able to come to Iowa. And so they were able, to participate and watch it in real time, which was great. And I've gone back and watched it myself, even though I was there in the church. From there, we went to the cemetery, and there again, at the gravesite, could only be the 8 of us, along with the priest. And the kids parked at the cemetery and stood outside their cars and kept a distance.
Most funeral directors have to really have a heart for people, and what allows us to continue in that is to being able to make a difference.
Oftentimes, funerals are older people, and their friends and family are older, and you just have to be careful, very careful. I'm a hugger. And a lot of my family are huggers. Closure is a real thing. We feel we have unfinished business. At some point, want to celebrate Mom, because she certainly deserves being celebrated.
So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a sense for the challenges that we were faced as a profession, and also even more importantly, as I said earlier, the challenges that were faced by families in having to deal with this type of a period. Now, in June, the mandate for 10 people was lifted. Now I believe we can have up to 50% of the capacity of the venue. So it certainly made it a lot better. It's not ideal because obviously with a family like that where you have 80 or 90 people, and then of course you're wanting friends and community members to join in, it still can be quite difficult, but certainly a lot better than it was back in the period of April and May. One more slide and I'll turn the podium over to Bob. The other aspect of our business is caring for the deceased themselves. And I have given a couple of tours to the Rotary Club when we have those days where you can go visit a business, and I'll plan to do that again. One of the things I get a lot of feedback on is when people are able to see the parts of the funeral home that the general public never sees. And this would be one of those areas. This is our care center where we would be doing the embalming and the dressing, casketing, applying cosmetics, doing hair, that type of thing. But during the period of COVID, we always use universal precaution in those areas. Iowa is a state that requires a dual license. So in Iowa, you have to be a licensed embalmer in order to be a licensed funeral director. Not all states are like that. So all of our funeral directors are qualified to do the work in this area of the funeral home as well. But as you can see with the area or the period of COVID, we think we've served roughly 100 or so families that are decedents that have been COVID positive. So our care team members have to use universal precaution. They have to gown up in every situation, and they have to wear a face shield. You can see the upper left picture pulling the eye wash station. These areas are mandated by OSHA. The air has to completely be recycled in this room every 15 minutes. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of a sense for that side of it as well. So that concludes my remarks. I'm going to turn the podium over to my good friend Bob Christensen, and I'm told that there's a wipe in here, Bob, so I'll clean this microphone up for you.
Thank you, Jamie, President Doug, and Kitty. Folks, I'm truly honored to be able to share the program today with my friend Mark. Mark and I have been friends for 30 years. I have the highest respect for Mark and the people that work for Mark. Mark commented about the relationship with Hamilton's and Iles. I take great pride in that relationship that we've had over the years. 17 years ago, a gentleman by the name of Carlton Peterson hired me at Hamilton's as an advanced planning counselor and entrusted me with Hamilton's families. It's been one of the highlights of my life to help families, and Mark, you can relate to this, help families sometimes in the darkest hour of their life. You're familiar with this slide here. That's our central funeral home at 605 Lyon. Our business center is located there, along with our preparation center. We at Hamilton's, we have 6 locations in the greater Des Moines metropolitan area. We have a funeral home in Altoona and one in Mitchellville. Hamilton's, we've been in business for 100 years, locally owned and operated by the Peterson family. Mark, excellent program. That was powerful, that video. We too at Hamilton's, we've sat across the table from families that have been traumatized, losing a loved one to COVID-19. Those families I feel for. They never had a chance to say goodbye, never had a chance to hold their loved one's hand before they passed away. They never had a chance to enter the care facility or the ICU unit. During the past 6 months, when you've driven around Des Moines, you've seen signs that say, "Heroes work here." Mark can relate to this. During this pandemic, I've worked with heroes at Hamilton's. Heroes at Hamilton's that have been on the front line in this battle against COVID-19. COVID-19 is very cruel. I'm asked several times when COVID-19 hit, how did it change the business in advance planning? And Governor Reynolds' proclamation of a lockdown. We at Hamilton's at that time made a decision in the best interest of our families and staff for their health and safety, not to go to homes to do pre-plans. Instead, we did pre-plans by phone, by email, in some cases in person, but through new technology, we did several pre-plans by phone, Zoom meeting. And by Zoom meeting, we can cover every detail of the pre-planning process, and we can also, if we have to, execute and sign a contract. And this is within the comfort of the family's home. Let me ask you, New Year's Day of this year, how many of us had a resolution that you would become an expert at Zoom meetings in the upcoming year? Anybody see that coming? What is advanced planning? Advanced planning is the process of setting out one's wishes and instructions to be followed at the time of death. It helps to avoid having this responsibility placed on a loved one. It allows time for the thoughtful consideration that these important decisions deserve. Provides peace of mind. You're doing your family a big favor by pre-planning, whether you pre-plan with me, Mark, or your favorite family funeral home, pre-plan. In conclusion with my remarks, to praise the medical community, doctors, nurses here in Des Moines, across Iowa, and across the United States of America for their sacrifice. And in some cases, they paid the supreme sacrifice. Also, I'd like to praise first responders, the police and the fire. Any questions?
I'm Bill Jackson. Bob, do you have to prepay for a pre-plan?
Bill, that's an excellent question, and absolutely not. We want everyone to pre-plan their funeral arrangements. We also want people to understand the options and benefits in pre-funding your pre-plan. With that said, many folks that pre-plan, they pre-fund. Now keep in mind, with advanced planning, time is on your side.
How many COVID-19 cases have you had this year?
Another excellent question. Bill, I can't give you the number. I don't have that number. But what I can say is that for many weeks, all families that came through our doors were affected because of the restrictions that Mark talked about, whether or not they or their loved one had died of COVID-19. The funeral industry, when this pandemic broke out, we were informed to expect mass casualties, and that has not happened.
Question here for you. You talked it from the perspective of those of us in the room that plan ahead, have resources available to us as individuals. I'd like to get your perspective on things that affect those that are not able to pre-plan, maybe for financial reason, they don't have the financial ability. What's happening to those folks, and how are they going through this time period where the resources may be very limited to actually take care of those people and this time in their life where they're having to go through a death of a loved one? So I guess I'm kind of looking at, those that are less fortunate to have the affluency that maybe those of us in this room have. How does that part of the community deal with death during this difficult time?
It's a great question. Thank you for asking it. One of the biggest advantages of pre-planning as it relates to not pre-planning is the ability to be able to make payments. If someone dies without a pre-plan, most funeral homes would expect to be paid 100%, more than likely either prior to the services being rendered or within 30 days of the services being rendered. There's really no option to make payments at the time of a death. But with a pre-plan, you do have the option to make payments. So people who are in the demographic that you are describing in your question would really especially benefit from making a pre-plan, because they could literally make payments down to the lowest amount that would fit within their budget. So that would be the big advantage that they would have. Now, if they have not pre-planned and they show up at the funeral home at the time of a death, I think our community is very fortunate to have two family-owned practices here in Des Moines, and between the two of us, we would handle the majority of the business because we both would go out of our way to meet that family where they're at. I'm sure Hamilton's probably does this as well as we do. We would find out, what do you have? And we would provide services commensurate with what they would have, but probably at a fairly significant discount to what we would typically charge. So neither one of our firms would ever turn anybody away. If they're truly in need, we will serve them, and we will try to do the best that we can to give them a dignified service for their loved one. Does that answer your question? Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. My name is John Stark. An endorsement, then a question. My mother, now we're wiping the microphone. My mother passed away in October, and she was pre-planned and pre-funded, and the level of stress that it reduces from the family is amazing. When you walk in and say, here, and they're actually already ready for it, it makes a big difference. So I would encourage, we're all going to pass away. My question is, when we think of heroes working, there's been an enormous amount of stress on you and your staffs just by COVID-19. Now that's on top of dealing with death every day. I'm curious from a personal standpoint how you and your staffs handle that stress on a regular daily basis, and then how it's been exacerbated during COVID-19.
Wow, what a great question. Thank you for asking that. My dad often said that to be a funeral director, it really had to be a calling. It's an extremely demanding profession. And if you don't look at it like it's a calling, if you look at it just like it's a punch in, punch out type of a job, you will not last in it. You won't like it. You won't last in it. So that's the first answer, is that people who do this work and do it for a long period of time, they truly look at it like it's a calling. So when you look at something that way, you are willing to undergo personal sacrifice in order to deliver on your calling. And that is and why do you do it? You do it because of all of the nice notes and emails and comments that families say to you about how grateful they are for what you did for them and helped them through. That's worth a lot. And relative to your question about how do you keep them safe during a pandemic, it's hard. You know, here you have families coming into the funeral home to make arrangements for their loved one who might have come from a care facility, might have come from the hospital. They don't even know whether they're COVID positive or not. It's extremely difficult. So you do the best you can. You distance in the room. You try to have Zoom meetings if you can. Some families don't know how to use the technology, so you have no choice but to meet with them in person. So it's just difficult, and thank you for asking that question, because both Bob and I are extremely proud to work with the people that we work with, because in all honesty, not very many people would want to do it. Thanks.
Ganesh again, Pat. Great to see you guys. So Carlton Peterson many years ago had this wisdom about this wildflower scattering area. And for those of you that don't know, I represent the City of Des Moines Parks and Rec Cemetery Manager. So we have a great partnership with these companies as well as a few others. But our partnership goes back, 150 years or whatever. So Carlton's vision was focused on cremations, and as both of you could tell us, more than 50% of burials end in cremation. And dealing with COVID-19, what we're seeing is a number of people choosing to wait and defer those services much further down the road. Can you speak to that a little bit, and also what you're seeing in the way of cremations in your industry?
A great question. He did. That was tremendous vision that Carlton had to suggest that. It's a little bit like Leroy Dunn, who founded the Dunn's Funeral Home. He had the vision of putting in a crematory in 1926. The cremation rate back in 1926 was minuscule. In fact, that crematory is the third oldest operating crematory in the United States due to that vision. So, but relative to your question about the cremation rate and deferring services, you're right. The cremation rate is going up. Last year, I think for both Hamilton's and us, it was probably roughly in about the 55% area. There's parts of the country that are at 70 or higher. It would be unfair if I didn't add that most of the people who choose to cremate have a service. Most of them memorialize their loved one. About 22% of them actually have their decedent in a casket, and it's cremated following the service. So You might not even know it. You might go to a funeral service that looks like it's going to go to the cemetery, and it doesn't. That casket will be taken back to the crematorium. Regarding your question about deferring services, one of the suggestions I'd like to make here to all of you, because obviously you wouldn't know about this, you don't live in this industry like I do, or like Bob does, is really two things. If you take the cremains home with you and your plan is to do something with them, but you really don't know what, there's a really good chance that those cremains will be sitting in your home for many years. That's what we see. So we would suggest, and we don't own cemeteries, so I'm not saying this because we own cemeteries, but we would strongly suggest that you set yourself a deadline. Maybe it's your loved one's birthday, or maybe it's Father's Day or Mother's Day, or just something significant out into the future. You set yourself a deadline to figure out what you're going to do with those cremains. Go see Ganesh and go see his team, or go to your favorite cemetery, but think about it, because I think what's going to happen, and we're already starting to see it to a certain degree, is somebody buys a house, and by gum, up in the upper shelf of the closet, they find 2 urns from 20 years ago, or somebody buys a car, and God forbid somebody would think that the trunk of their car is a good resting spot for their loved one, but honestly, it happens, and they bring an urn in and they want us to identify who that person was because they don't know. That's going to happen with the cremation rate going up. That's just going to happen more and more. My final thought I'll leave you with on that question is something that grief experts say. This isn't coming from me. This is coming from grief experts. Where you live and where you mourn should be 2 separate places. Where you live and where you mourn should be 2 separate places, not the same place.
Mark and Bob, thank you. This is a topic that it's kind of the elephant in the room a lot of the times. My question has more to do from a macro perspective. COVID has changed the way businesses operate and will operate in the future. The funeral industry has I know, been going through consolidation. How much do you think the COVID will impact that consolidation going forward, especially not when it comes to necessarily businesses your size, but with smaller funeral homes in rural areas?
Great question, Skeet. I mean, you're right. The big consolidators, Des Moines lucky because the big consolidators are looking to cities like Des Moines. They want to buy us. They want to buy Hamilton's. And in many large cities around the country, they've done it already. You hardly find any independents left in the bigger cities. Des Moines is unusual to have 2 large family-owned operators in a city this size. In the rural areas, they have no interest whatsoever in buying firms that are in rural areas. And so that really leaves a dilemma for those owners as to what's my succession plan going to look like? And in many cases, they just don't have one. Their succession plan in situations like that there's really 2 options. They either have a family member that has an interest in coming back into it, or there's maybe a person down the road, that wants to add on to their operation and buy a small town operation. There's a lot of those now. There's a lot of. You'd be surprised how many. You go to a town, for instance, like Algona, Iowa. Well, you wouldn't know this, but Algona owns 7 other funeral homes, all within 30, 45 miles from Algona, and that's partly the strategy to the second part of your question about just the trends that are taking place in funeral service, and to be that I showed you a picture of that care center the government's really gotten into, our profession like most professions. And so these care centers are highly regulated. You can't just throw up a care center like that. Same with the crematorium. It has to be done a certain way, and it's very, very expensive to do it. So one of the benefits of having multiple locations is that you have a hub and spoke system where you're feeding, you're taking all of the customers that are using your other locations, and they're all coming into a central facility. That's how Hamilton's does it. Theirs is at East 6th, and that's how we do it. Ours is at Dunn's on Grand Avenue. If you're in a small town, you have to figure out how you're going to do that. Do I buy up all my neighbors? So now I've got enough of an economy of scale there to make that work. Or, in all honesty, do I just go out of business? And I think we're going to see a lot of that.
My friends don't want to see me coming up here. Hi, guys. Good job. Well done. I just wanted to make a comment about the question that somebody asked you about their business and their commitment. I am my husband and his father were in the business for 60 years, so I have a little bit of insight. But the funeral homes in Des Moines have always been good friends to each other. Mabel Dahlstrom-Borg, who owned Dahlstrom's Funeral Home and who was the oldest licensed woman undertaker in the country. Mabel always used the term, and I didn't hear them use it today, but she used the term undertaking because she said it is an undertaking to do what they do and do it in the most dignified and responsible way. It's an undertaking that you take the responsibility for. Good job, guys. About the funeral homes in Des Moines being complementary to each other. When Tonini died, Mary had all of the funeral homes come to be represented at his service.
Thank you, Mark and Bob, for sharing with our club today. We're glad to have you both as members of the Rotary Club of Des Moines, and it's always good to see people in the same profession that work so well together. So in your honor today, we are going to donate the book Smithsonian STEM Lab to the Downtown School Library in honor of you both being here. And I think you both signed it and put some words of encouragement in there to our young readers. Mark saying that neither one of them could understand the book, so but thank you all that are here with us today in person, those of you out in cyberspace watching live, or those of you watching some other time. For those of you watching remotely today, there are 28 of us here in the room, all safely distanced. We hope more of you will consider RSVPing and attending in person if you're comfortable with that. We have moved our RSVPs to noon on Tuesdays. That's been about the last 2 weeks we've done that. And you can sign up by email link that goes out on Friday or in each Tuesday's email bulletin. Upcoming speakers. Next week we have Secretary of State Paul Pate, so bring in your mail-in ballots to hand to him next week. I'm sure he'll appreciate that. October 1st, Teresa Greenfield, candidate for U.S. Senate. Apparently she took my advice, as I've seen now a couple of her TV commercials. If she can't make it, I'm understanding that her twin sister will fill in for her. And as note, Senator Joni Ernst is scheduled for October 15th. If we have one, we will certainly have the other. And on October 8th, Barbara Stinson of the World Food Prize. And Elaine, who just was last at the microphone, said she had heard Barbara speak just recently, so she's previewed her for us and said she did an excellent job, so we're anxious to hear that. Again, thank you for being with us today and being part of your Rotary Club of Des Moines. And thanks again to all of those of you tuning in on cyberspace. And remember to leave something behind today, this upcoming week, no matter how big or small. Let's see if we can leave the world in a little better place. With that, we are adjourned.